Hi, this is my review of the KULT Divinity Lost, the original game soundtrack. These are 27 tracks of brooding, modern, Gnostic, Kabbalistic horror. With these tracks, you can set up the ambience for any KULT Divinity Lost RPG session. And these are also quite useful in any horror role-playing game. Particularly those role-playing games that have to do with dark fantasy, dark sci-fi, dark science fantasy, and of course, modern horror. I think it also applies to weird horror as well. It depends on how you're going to use these tracks. Now, let's talk about what you get when you purchase the KULT Divinity Lost, the original game soundtrack. You have two things included in the package. You have the 27 tracks, and you also have a booklet telling you about the artist that composed these wonderful works for KULT Divinity Lost. I was familiar with some of them before. Perhaps the one I am more familiar with is Atrium Carceri. He actually has a YouTube channel. I'm going to put the link in the description below because he composes some very amazing things, and he also has some other artists on his label. So all of these tracks in this original or official soundtrack, they set up the mood. They are more on the atmospheric side of things, so you can play in any of the realms, the concepts, and the places within KULT Divinity Lost, interact with different non-player characters and all sorts of entities. I think it's really cool that they added this booklet telling you about the artist and his vision, and a small description of what that artist is trying to communicate through the music. Now let's talk about the tracks. Each one of these tracks stands on its own. However, you can group them or divide them by subcategories, because some tracks represent, for example, the Labyrinth, some others Inferno, some others Metropolis, so they'll have to do with places and concepts within KULT Divinity Lost. And although they stand alone, like I mentioned, they still feel connected by a subtle thread. So all of those tracks that have to do with Limbo, with Inferno, with Metropolis, etc., they still feel quite in theme. And this speaks in favor of the integrity of KULT Divinity Lost. That is, the places and the concepts are so very well defined, even though they are quite metaphysical. They are so well established that it's very easy to grasp them as you listen to different tracks that fit in a single category. So now I'm going to share my thoughts and feelings on the different tracks. Let's start with the ones that deal with the Labyrinth. The Labyrinth in KULT has a certain duality to it. It is an abstract concept because everything in KULT is a labyrinth. The player characters are trying to navigate or make their way through different problems, the cosmology, the situations of KULT, and trying to make their way through those webs of lies, of the illusion that the Archons have weaved over humanity, and also be careful with other entities such as the Death Angels. There are many dangers. So the Labyrinth is a concept of making your way through all of those hazards that are destructive to the body and to the spirit, and try to make sense of it all. But at the same time, the Labyrinth is an actual place. It is a division, or perhaps a sub-realm that is part of the underworld. This dark and terrible place explains why humanity is so fascinated with the dark corners of the earth and the universe itself. It is a maze of unnatural caverns with protrusions and edges that are abnormally sharp and pointy. Just stumbling about a cavern in the Labyrinth can hurt you severely or even kill you. The Labyrinth is very easy to tell apart from other places, while there are other sites that have a certain architecture to them. The Labyrinth seems to be natural and unnatural at the same time when compared to them. Suddenly these stone steps become natural looking steps, but the Labyrinth feels quite hostile. Those stone steps are there to confuse and to hurt and to mislead rather than to help you navigate your way from one place to another. There is also she who waits below. She influences humanity to dream of the labyrinth, and people are drawn to the labyrinth, subconsciously attracted to tunnels and sewers. They feel this maddening urge to explore deeper and darker places. The first track featuring the labyrinth is Atrium Carceri's The Citadel. This track is all about desolation, loneliness. At least that's what I feel. And it makes sense because of the Citadel theme. The labyrinth could take you to different places, but also certain relics. Even though the labyrinth could be considered a sort of wilderness of the underworld, it could take you to certain structures. And it is within citadels that you see the fallen power, or rather the decaying power, of some of the archons. Since the Demiurge disappeared, many citadels have fallen into decadence, and yet they are still emitting that primordial concept of mercy, of severity, of rulership, of love and hate. It depends on what it's trying to portray. So, with Atrium Carceri's The Citadel track, it has a certain calmness to it, but there is this underlying sense that something is quite wrong. That even though you are perhaps lulled in a sense of tranquility, something or someone could just strike from the shadows. I think this becomes even more evident near the end of the track, when the pace picks up a bit and there is a moment that calls for action. So this is a very interesting track that goes from almost complete calmness to this frenetic pace near the end, and suddenly there is this sort of white noise feel to it. So it plays with your feelings and emotions of going from one extreme to the other. The next one, featuring the Labyrinth, is the Borderlands by Second Escape. This one starts right away with making you feel at unease. The Borderlands, and pretty much any limit within the cosmology of KULT Divinity Lost, it doesn't represent just a separation between areas and between people. It represents an opportunity for invasion, getting from one concept into another uninvited, penetrating a realm. And in the Labyrinth, this is quite easy to do so because of the different twisting tunnels. Because of the way perspective itself plays tricks on your mind, you could be stumbling about so many different places within this multi-dimensional setting. So this, the Borderlands track, immediately puts you in a sense of being quite tense. You do not know what to expect. It is an ever-growing suspense, and I think that this track is also a great representation of the illusion of that sort of sheet or barrier that has been placed over Elysium. So humanity is just at the border of making some sort of discovery about their lost divinity. And with the Borderlands track, you're going to represent that moment when the player character is suddenly aware that there is more to reality than what has been taught to him through any institution or anything that has been established. It could be school, religion. It is when the player character suddenly starts to go into the darkest places of his own mind and of the world that he becomes aware of other less tangible dimensions, but still all too real. When he finally manages to make the jump from one realm to the other, but also connects the dots and perceives how all of these other realms have a direct effect on what is going on in Elysium, in what he would otherwise know as the real world. The next track featuring the Labyrinth is Purgatory by Precision Field. As you navigate your way through the dark tunnels, the crevices, the precipices of the Labyrinth, maybe you are quite unlucky and you end up in Purgatory. Now, a special thing about Purgatories in KULT Divinity Lost is that they are quite intimate, quite personal. They are intimate infernos of sorts. They are hellish prisons or pocket dimensions completely made out of that player character's memories, of his hopes and wishes, crushed, of course, and of his dread. So a purgatory could seem an eternity of pain, torture, and anguish for anyone who is trapped there. If somebody actually makes it out of a purgatory, that person remains completely changed. Sometimes that individual is unrecognizable as a person. So the labyrinth could actually lead you to one of these purgatories. It is not unknown for different creatures, different beings, to make their way from one purgatory to another, even though they are not to be imprisoned within them. And perhaps going into someone else's purgatory is the only way to find a clue, an artifact, some sort of spell to solve a problem that goes beyond the player character's current set of abilities. So I think that this track featuring the purgatory connects perfectly with the labyrinth theme, because as you are moving through the different tunnels, the caverns, the grottos, you may end up in a purgatory that goes beyond your wildest nightmares. As we make our way through the dark labyrinth, we eventually find ourselves at the Abyss, which is composed by Pandora's Black Book and Mechanoreceptor. The Abyss is somewhat of a complex concept within KULT Divinity Lost, because it is at the same time a place, but also it is a danger to the spirit, to the soul. As the player characters try to make sense of what is going on how the Archons and the Death Angels are having this war with humanity at the center of it, they start to perhaps fall into despair. With this track, you get a piece that connects both this philosophical concept but also the site of the Abyss, where the Demiurge had its citadel. The Demiurge is long gone, and now only this blackness remains. I think it would be quite disturbing if the player characters were moving through the labyrinth and suddenly they discovered that there is this entrance that connects the labyrinth to the Abyss. Will they dare to go deeper into this infinite blackness that once served as the seat of power for the Demiurge? So this track is very creepy, very eerie. All of the other ones also have a sense of brooding threat, of suspense, of mystery, but this one feels particularly alarming, not in a cacophonous sort of way, but because you feel that there is something just below this layer of notes and sounds, almost like a huge white shark just below the surface, waiting to strike. So this is a very suspenseful type of track, perfect to use it in moments where the player characters are confused as to where they are or how they should proceed. This is going to throw further confusion and dread into their journey. I also think that there is a prevalent desolation to the entire track that at the same time repels you and invites you into the abyss. Part of you wants to stay away from that darkness, from that blackness. But there is this other part, a call from she who dwells below, that is actually inviting you into the abyss, telling you that if you decide to take the jump into the unknowable, perhaps you will find the answer that you were looking for. I think the next track in the Labyrinth series, which is The Void by Zvaga, is very interesting, very intriguing. The Void is a concept well handled in KULT. Humanity in its entirety has this emptiness, this hole, this void, and all sorts of things machinated by the Archons and the Death Angels try to fill this void. Maybe they promise to fill it using all sorts of food and drugs, maybe through religion, maybe through education, maybe through some sort of trend, through all sorts of forms of indoctrination. So the void is exploited in KULT Divinity Lost. The Archons are keeping a tight leash on humanity, and they are also feeding on humanity, the death angels as well. It's a constant tug of war, as each one takes a piece of humanity's soul and pulls as hard as they can. So the void represents a spiritual emptiness, but it also has to do with perhaps when the player characters decided to take the jump into an abyss, or perhaps even the abyss, and they are still falling. Or maybe they have actually managed to hit the ground without dying, and they are now searching through the darkness. And for a track with the name of The Void, it has a certain liveliness to it. The Void hints that there is something just below your vision, your field of perception, that is fluttering about. Maybe it's just some sort of strange creature that is native to the abyss into which you have fallen. Or maybe it's a servant of the Archons or the Death Angels, fluttering about in moth-like wings, dragging its corpse-like body. In the Void, the most important thing to remember is that there is an emptiness in the metaphorical digestive systems of the Death Angels and the Archons, and they are waiting to feast upon humanity's soul. If you are not careful, you will end up as the main course. Appropriately enough, the next track in the Labyrinth series is Achlys by Tantric Ape. Achlys is the ultimate place of nothingness. This is beyond the labyrinth itself. Even a blind man would have trouble understanding the extreme and absolute nothingness of Achlys. This is beyond She Who Waits Below. This is the black hole of all black holes, eternal, dreadful, the emptiness. And I think this track does an excellent job at portraying that. There is this sort of subtle, atmospheric tune to it that just barely gives you a hint of this voyage into the deep. It is said that Achlys can only be penetrated, or you can only go into it by making the correct sacrifices and rites and finding them. They are quite obscure. It is a place that is only mentioned in whispers. Some could say that Achlys is the mother of She Who Waits Below, or that perhaps she is an aspect of Achlys itself. Achlys is total chaos to the point that everything ceases to exist, but this is the perfect place to release yourself from the shackles of the illusion. Achlys could be perhaps the only pure place where archetypal creation can fully manifest itself. Despite the difficult to grasp concept of Achlys, this track by Tantric Ape is very soothing actually. Perhaps it reflects the nothingness of the spirit of creation, where there is nothing positive, nothing negative, there is just nothing. This track is perfect to communicate that sense. Perhaps at the end of it all, there is only nothingness. And perhaps that is also the beginning. The next tracks feature Elysium. Everyone knows what Elysium is, even those that haven't played KULT Divinity Lost. Elysium is a fictional representation of our world, of our real life, that is all too real for its depiction. Elysium has been enforced by the illusion, by the structures set up by the Demiurge, and further maintained through the Archon's works to keep humanity in ignorance, to keep people away from the concept of them actually being divine. So what Elysium is in KULT Divinity Lost is just a huge lie. Through different sorts of social, economical, political, and religious programming, humans are kept away from even thinking about their lost divinity. It is only through great effort that the player characters in KULT Divinity Lost manage to pierce this veil of lies. They manage to go beyond what is presented to them. Otherwise, they remain drunk, trapped in a cage of materialism and ego, being kept at the most shallow expression of their beings, just thinking on what is presented before them, but without even going beyond the concept of their reality, without even thinking of what started it all. What's the origin of things? Why is life, their everyday life, going on without them having a say as to how things should be? So Elysium is all about this, and I think that these tracks do an amazing job at representing that philosophical puzzle. First, we have Death Spiral by Mechanoreceptor. The Death Spiral is not a concept exclusive to KULT Divinity Lost, but in this setting, it makes me think of the never-ending cycle of death, of this death spiral, effectively, of people dying and ending up in different places. Maybe they end up in Inferno. Maybe they become trapped in purgatory, or as a sort of hostage or servant to the machinations of the Archons. And when it comes to this death spiral track, it makes me think of machinery going on. Not as heavily as in other places within the setting, but you still feel that someone is working really hard to maintain the illusion, to keep people trapped in Elysium. The rhythm and pacing of this track communicates that there is something very sinister going on just behind the veil, just beyond what the player characters consider to be reality as it is presented. If they would only reach out, trying to penetrate that film, that layer of lies and deception, they would be able to see the entire cosmology unveiled before them, and they will start to unravel the mysteries of their own lost divinity. The next track representing Elysium is Hangman's Bridge. The name of this track is appropriate, because once the characters decide to find out what really is going on in their existence, related to humanity as a whole, there is no going back. It's a bridge that once you cross it, it immediately burns behind you. Hangman's Bridge also has many sounds evocative of machinery. It's all quite subtle, yet there is nothing too overt, giving away the inner workings of the system established by the Demiurge and further enforced by the Archons. But as the track progresses, you can also perceive a certain melancholy and solemn attitude to the entire piece that makes you wonder if it was actually the right choice, if trying to go against your masters was the true path that you needed to follow. That is for the player characters to decide. Either way, the choice could be clearer if they consider the following. Would it be worth it to remain asleep and become prey once more to the Archons and Death Angels that are running the show? Or would it be better to cast your dice and see if they land on the number that will inevitably lead you to complete awakening? Next on the Elysium category, we have Into the Nothingness by Warfield. The Nothingness reminds me of the Void, and there are actually some connections between Elysium and the Void. There is a particular adventure, I'm not going to mention which one because I want to avoid spoilers, where it is vital for the player characters to find one of these doorways into nothingness. The journey will be quite dangerous. Not only you have to face conventional threats related to criminals and law enforcement, you also have to deal with the problems that arise once you make your path into the nothingness. The beings inhabiting the passageway between Elysium and the nothingness do not want you there. The very environment seems to despise your presence there. They do not want humanity to once more regain their divine power, their authority to rule over all. So I think Into the Nothingness combines mystery with hostility quite efficiently. I would also like to add that there is a certain retro quality to it. I can almost imagine those sort of films that you would see on the 80s perhaps, that try to approach these subjects with some obscure soundtrack that becomes vaguely familiar even when you listen to it the first time. Next we have The Insentient by Howler. still on the Elysium category. The sounds on the Insentient resonate deep within your core. If there are other tracks in this album that had a certain sinister element to them, the Insentient is pure malevolence. As the pacing goes up, as the track goes forward into realms beyond, you can feel your heart racing. It's both frightening but exciting at the same time, and this is part of the essence of KULT. There is a blur where you do not know if pleasure suddenly became pain or if pain became pleasure. Just before reaching some sort of enlightenment, this is a perfect track to play when the player characters are unraveling an ever-growing threat, an increasingly disturbing menace that will require all of the resources of the player characters, perhaps even their lives or even their souls, in order to overcome it. This could spell their transformation into something greater than what they currently are, or it could result into an eternity of damnation. When you decide to unravel the mysteries of KULT, you are gambling with your very soul. Then we have music featuring Metropolis. Metropolis is quite the source of pain for humanity. It is the forgotten domain when humanity ruled over the entirety of life, of existence, over all of the realms, material and spiritual. Metropolis is a perfect example of decadence. It is composed of pretty much every sort of architecture known to man. It is the composition of everything civilized. Every time mankind has built up great civilizations, it was in memory of what was once built in Metropolis. So when the player characters enter Metropolis, they will find themselves astonished as to how much they recognize when it comes to the architecture, the layout, the structure of it. But at the same time, they will be horrified. A tiny glimpse, a fragment of memory will make its way into the characters' thoughts, and they will remember all that was lost. And now Metropolis is a shell of desolation. There are streets, infinity of streets that are uninhabited. One could wander Metropolis for all eternity if you do not know how to move within this strange archetypical conjunction of cities. First, we have Machine City, composed by Mechanoreceptor. Machine City represents that part of Metropolis where the Archons have set up things so that the illusion in Elysium works in perfect order. There are strange beings that control this machinery, that keep humanity ignorant, that enforce all concepts of materialism, and that there is nothing else. That's why it is so important for different figures of authority to proclaim that everything that goes outside the realm of matter does not exist. And those that actually pretend to guide humanity towards a higher calling are actually religious figures that want to lead humanity astray, that want to keep them in a net of falsehoods and disinformation. Machine City can be a truly terrifying composition. You start to ponder, to think about how the illusion is directly controlled from Metropolis, that is, from the original home of humanity. So once this would have been the refuge, the safe haven of enlightened humanity, and now it is the center from which humanity is being kept in complete ignorance. Following that, we have The Sprawl by Mind Divided. Moving through Metropolis can be disheartening. You never know how to get into certain buildings. It's very difficult to move from one district to the other. Metropolis has its own laws, and they seem quite disjointed. Sometimes you can only go up if you decide to jump into a crevice, into a pit of sorts. Sometimes buildings are not accessible until you give the correct answer, until you reach a certain mindset. All things unrelated to moving about from one place to the other are actually the keys to safe navigation within Metropolis. In Metropolis lie the citadels of the Archons. You must navigate the sprawl carefully. If you get too close to one of these buildings, the essential principles of such places will start to infect you. Suddenly, rigorous and strict order will take control of your thoughts. Suddenly, nothing but the search of beauty will matter. Each one of these spheres of power, embodied through the citadels, can take over the player characters if they do not take the adequate steps to circumvent these powers. Following that, we have Infinite Inward by Howler. This is a very good follow-up for the Sprawl, because in Metropolis there are just countless of structures. Because humanity has been reigning in the past for so long, for untold aeons, you do not know the full extension of everything that humanity built when it was divine. But now that everything is lost, there are just millions upon millions of buildings, uninhabited, some of them hiding dark secrets, some of them housing blasphemous relics, and therefore Metropolis is truly an infinite source to obtain divine wisdom and precarious knowledge. Sometimes the way to move from one building to the other, from one block to the other, lies inside of you. You do not physically walk the path. You must search into the deepest part of your mind and soul. Sometimes, just by solving a philosophical dilemma, you will end up in a different part on this archetype of all cities. This track does an amazing job and representing those infinite loop type of moments where nothing ever ends, nothing ever begins or stops until you look inward into the infinity of your divine self. Then we have the Metropolis Underground by Michael Idehol. Metropolis combines the architecture of all things in the past, in the present, and in the future of humanity. As you move through the streets of Metropolis, you will find architecture that can be easily found in history books. You will find structures that you see in your everyday life in Elysium, and also you will find strange and weird structures that have yet to be. And therefore, it is also logical to assume that in the underground of Metropolis, you can find horrors from both the past, the present, and the future. There are servants of the Archons that are just as terrifying as the servants of the Death Angels. And there are also beings that have no faction affiliation, that are waiting in the dark, ready to devour anyone who goes too deep into the dark corners of Metropolis. Perhaps there are treasures to be found in the underground. Maybe there are clues on how to help humanity regain its lost divinity that can only be found in the subways, in the catacombs, in the wells and unfathomable abysses within the Metropolis underground. So the characters will have to go on. They will have to go deeper and explore the blackest areas of Metropolis, even if that means that they will end up in the Labyrinth. Maybe there are parts of the Labyrinth that connect directly to Metropolis, and if the characters go too deep into the Metropolis underground, they may end up trapped. As the corridors and passageways become more and more narrow, maybe something closes behind them, and now they are stuck, they are entombed for all eternity in the forgotten places of the Metropolis underground. Maybe somebody locked them there, or maybe Metropolis itself hates humanity due to their fall from grace. So going into the Metropolis underground could be like going into the deepest bowels of a beast. Then we have the theme of purgatory. This has been touched briefly in some of the tracks that I have discussed, but let's look deeper into purgatory as a concept handled in KULT Divinity Lost. Purgatory is a place of torment but also of transformation. It is a place where punishment is being carried out based on everything that the person has lived, everything concerning experiences, sadness, pain, joy, laughter, everything concerning that person's experience in Elysium creates a cell, shackles, implements of torture, and everything is used against the person trapped within this particular purgatory. Each purgatory is different from the others, but all of those purgatories have the same effect. They either destroy the victim within, or if the prisoner manages to escape, he comes out completely changed. The first track expressing this theme is Corruption of the Primordial Condition by Mechanoreceptor. The system to keep humans under check must be maintained rigorously. Every time a human even ponders about the mysteries of divinity and the spirit, they must be kept in check. What science presents as truth is actually dogma. Suddenly, the scientific method is pushed aside and humanity is taught what to believe, not based on experimentation, but rather on propaganda and data that the person will never put to the test. Likewise, if someone actually goes beyond that and starts questioning the greater truths of existence, religion must be there to capture those thoughts, shape them, mold them, and steer them away from the truth, lead them to other things. It could be towards conflict, it could be towards a false notion of peace. Everything must be maintained to keep humanity under control. So the Archons must enforce this system of restraints, and it is through this that the corruption of the primordial condition of mankind is managed and accomplished. The next track connects quite well to this concept of corruption. It is the Infinity of Solitude, Vaisvaga. All of this corruption of humanity's divinity is a preparation for purgatory. All of the failures serve as an excuse to trap humanity. The prisoner and victim could become aware of the total concept of solitude. It is an endless separation from everything that is. Not quite like Limbo, where you still have a sort of semblance of what you would expect existence to be. Here in Purgatory, everything is deformed and reshaped so that dreams immediately give way to nightmares, so that hope immediately crashes down into despair. In this track, a perfect balance of apathy and uncertainty is achieved, with some heavy metallic sounds every now and then that remind the prisoners of Purgatory that an infinity of isolation is very much a possibility, with endless torments within this personal purgatory. The following track, An Offer You Can't Refuse by Warfield, is a very seductive, very intriguing sort of proposition. Purgatory could last for an eternity, but there is a way to escape, but at what price? Perhaps one of the Archons has a task for you. Maybe he will offer to transform you into a lictor in exchange for your release from Purgatory. Maybe you have called upon the attention of certain infernal powers, and they will transform you into a Racide or some other monstrous creature at their service. So both forces, Death Angels or Archons, could release you from Purgatory. But are you willing to pay the price? This music has a very upbeat, exciting feel to it, perhaps to represent the hope that you can finally escape Purgatory, perhaps after centuries if not millennia of imprisonment. But by doing so, you would be caught in this duality, at the service of the infernal powers or under the enslavement of angelic powers. This is truly an offer you can't refuse if you cannot bear the eternity of the torments in Purgatory. The next track is Feverishly Dreaming of Reality. At first, you could listen to this and think that it is more of a theme appropriate for Limbo, because it has to do with dreams and their connection to Elysium. But in Purgatories, as visions, sounds, thoughts, textures of what you experienced in life, and most importantly, of your failures in life, and not realizing that there was something else beyond the mundane existence, and not trying to pierce the veil and crash the illusion, now you end up in Purgatory as a sort of just punishment. So it is likely that your mind will undergo this fever process, trying to think what went wrong in your lifetime. Because now the purgatory is no guarantee that you will be able to return to that existence. And knowing the thirst of the archons and the death angels, maybe they will drain you completely of your enthusiasm, of your will to live and to exist and to retake your divinity. Maybe you will become a shell of your former self, and you will be released until you wander aimlessly and you fall down into the deepest crevices and be reborn once more as an individual in complete ignorance of divine powers. And then we reach the tracks that feature Inferno. It is no wonder that many consider Inferno to be the worst place possible. It is a place of darkness, of disturbing things that slither about, of tyrants that reign supreme, of nightmarish landscapes. All of the worst things possible in existence gather at Inferno. This is the very center of it all. While some could consider Metropolis to be an excess of suffocating absolute order, Inferno could be seen as the fountain of unbridled and terrifying madness. However, there are also some that would consider Inferno to be the center of beauty and pleasure, usually those that find the line between pleasure and pain quite blurred, those that consider pain and ugliness to be the equivalent of pleasure and exquisite beauty. It is the seat of power of the death angels and the origin of all of their cults that in one way or the other make their way into Elysium to pollute humanity and drive them against the archons, their eternal enemies. Now, the first track, which is Torture Room by Mechanoreceptor, features those dark chambers where even angels are taken as prisoners to be subjected to the vilest of torments. The most disturbing thing of all is that the beings of Inferno have developed their torture to the point of where art and science combine, and an angel could even consider it pleasurable, until the servant of the archons now becomes the slave of the death angels. Compared to the torture rooms of Inferno, a personal purgatory could be seen as a walk in the park. The chambers where the death angels and their Razites, their Nepharites, and all of their servants carry out their dark art remove all trace of hope from their victims. Some people that could be considered innocent could be dragged into these chambers. Perhaps even victims could be subjected to the tortures. They also enjoy doing mind games, taking the victim and raising it above her tormentors, allowing the victim to become the tormentor instead. And just when things reach that moment of apparent justice, the victim is once more cast down and is subjected to the tortures of her tormentors. It is only in some exceptional cases where the vilest of all humans, while being subjected to the tortures/pleasures of Inferno, may be deemed worthy to serve one of the death angels. The next track that features Inferno is called Starless Sky, Dead Sun by Svaga. In Inferno, there are dark citadels. They are dark reflections of the citadels that you would find in Metropolis belonging to the archons. These citadels embody the building blocks of creation. They are true principles, and just like the citadels of the archons can extend their influence to the point that they infect anyone who goes near them, the dark citadels also exercise their domain over anyone that inhabits Inferno. Suddenly, the person starts to think about torture, wickedness, lies, death, and pain, as if it were something to be desired, something that is exceedingly fun, something that is first nature to that creature. Inferno is a scatological dimension of endless torment. Under this starless sky and the dead sun, there is no hope for anyone here. Once you reach Inferno, it will take more than a miracle to escape. Many decide to subject themselves to the death angels in hopes of escaping Inferno, but they are forever bound to these rulers of misery, of pain and severity. Then we have The 9 Halls of Hell by Warfield. It is appropriate that there are 9 halls in hell. The number 9 is usually associated with completion and evolution. But in the 9 halls of hell, this is a mockery of that concept. These are 9 halls containing beings created with the sole purpose of inflicting suffering, of taking others to damnation. No one will escape their grasp as long as they are within their reach. If you believe their fallacies that the religions created by the Archons have been propagating about that anyone who is good escapes the torments of hell, you could not be more mistaken in KULT Divinity Lost. Even the innocent and the decent people can be dragged into these places and subjected to the whims of those that seek nothing but destruction, pain and death. No angel will come to save you unless you feature in their plans, in their agendas. No other entity will rescue you from the vile torments of the 9 halls of hell. It is only up to you if you decide to awaken to the lost divinity within your human self. The next track is Astray Under the Archon's Influence by Occult Cow Demise. It is a never-ending war between the Archons and the Death Angels. Humanity is just at the middle. It is a valuable resource and fuel, but most of all, humanity is always a potential threat. That is why it is necessary for the Archons to keep humanity fooled under the power structures of the world. They must be indoctrinated so that no thought of rebellion or awakening crosses their minds. If they ever regain the awareness that they were once divine, it would spell perhaps the demise of the Archons. And so, hell, Inferno comes into play. They also wish to use humanity against the Archons, but they must carry out a delicate dance in which they allow certain corruption, certain freedom for humanity to affect the Archons while not spoiling the plans of Inferno. Humanity is seen as a tool and a weapon for the forces of Inferno, and also as nourishment. There is always an opportunity for someone in mankind to be tricked by the forces of Inferno, or perhaps to be enlightened in a true darker sense, to open the gates between Elysium and Inferno, to pierce the veil. It doesn't matter if that person was fooled into thinking that ascension is just a few steps away, while it is actually a deep plunge into the dark crevices of the infernal realms. The only thing in the minds of the rulers of Inferno is the total annihilation of the Archons and their path to ruling supreme over everything. Mankind is just either a stone in the way, or perhaps a valuable tool to use against the celestial forces. Then we have Under the Dead Sun by Tantric Ape. Astaroth is the ruler of Inferno. He is the twin of the Demiurge. When his twin disappeared without a trace, with no clue as to his whereabouts, Astaroth went looking for him. Nobody knows exactly what he saw during his journey, but he returned more than battered, more than bruised. He returned severely wounded, and he is now ruling from his dark citadel at the center of Inferno, under the Dead Sun. Astaroth plans and seeks the answer. Where did his brother go? And how can he bring the demise of the Archons? And how can he crush and feed on humanity and use them as valuable tools in his personal war? Even the other rulers in hell do not know exactly what goes through Astaroth's mind. So this ruler of the darkest of all realms keeps plotting under the Dead Sun. Many could mistakenly think that Astaroth is a ruler, a liberator, that seeks to break the cycle and pry away the Archon's grip over Elysium, over mankind. But what he truly seeks is to set his principles up as lords of reality. Then we have the tracks featuring Limbo. Limbo is a realm beyond dreams. You could say that it's an ocean that connects all dreams, but at the same time, all of those realities are separated because they came to be based on the hopes and wishes of each individual that had those human and sometimes inhuman dreams. In Limbo, you can see visions that are either soothing or disturbing, or perhaps, paradoxically, both at the same time. The first track featuring Limbo is To Sleep is Death, To Awaken is Hell by Mechanoreceptor. Because of the illusion created by the Archons, rather created by the Demiurge and enforced by the Archons, and because of the machinations of Inferno, some humans decide to drift into delusion, into a false sense of reality. They start to live these fantasies rather than their own lives. So they prefer to sleep, and they end up dying in a sense. They abandon the waking world and they drift into limbo. And they do that based on fear, discomfort, uneasiness, because they know that if they awaken once more, they will be plunged into their own personal hells, into their own lives. So it is easy to get lost into limbo. It is easy for your essence to dissolve into your fantasies and delusions, or perhaps even to fall into the grips of Metropolis or Inferno if you are not careful, because Limbo is connected to all places. The next track featuring Limbo is Approach to Darkness by The Second Escape. There are beings, entities in Limbo, known as the Dream Princes. These, that were once human beings, or perhaps something else, decided to escape into Limbo, approaching the darkness of their own subconscious, trying to explore this reality of thoughts, visions, and delusion. And they become princes, rulers in the darkness. They prefer their own realities to what is actually going on. They become shadows in this darkness, and they stop in their advancement, in their way to awakening. Their divinity is lost for good, or at least until they finally realize that they can travel between realms, from Limbo to Metropolis, to any sorts of wilderness, to the Labyrinth, to Inferno, to anywhere else. So maybe they got too close to their inner darkness. They got lost in their obscure desire for a reshaped reality based on their whims, on their wants, on what they perceive to be needs. They have lost all sense that Limbo is just one expression of the complexity of their beings. This is a dream world, but unless you want to forsake your ability to keep going into a greater reality, approaching Limbo could be just as dangerous as plunging into the abyss itself. The next track is A Stroll Along the Edge of Forever by Svaga. Once someone becomes aware of the potential of using Limbo as a sort of crossroads, that being becomes extremely powerful. Moving through Limbo with an aware and conscious mind, even within this dream world, can lead one to enlightenment, to awakening. It is through Limbo where you can reach the many back doors to all sorts of places, all sorts of prisons, and many pathways to liberation. Going into Limbo means that you will be forever lost while trying to skirt the edge of the foreverness of eternity. But at the same time, it means that you are at the very tip of the dimensional crossroads where you can catch a glimpse of any place imaginable in the cosmology of KULT Divinity Lost. It is only the highest citadels and the darkest and deepest dungeons that can escape one's vision when you come used to using Limbo as a sort of lens, as a sort of telescope, to pry into the affairs of those that wish to control eternity. This track of A Stroll Along the Edge of Forever does an excellent job at representing that very thin line that connects the dream world with the waking world and beyond. The next track featuring Limbo is Imperio Sanguinis by Howler. There are many dangers in Limbo. There are beings that can actually snatch away beings in Elysium. Those that think that they are safe in the material world are in for a surprise when suddenly this boogeyman, this entity of nightmares, appears from under the bed, from out of the closet, comes out of the TV, and takes that person away into the most schizophrenic areas of Limbo. There are also dream wanderers in Limbo. Some of them could be considered the most enlightened beings that you will meet, but some others have lost their humanity completely. They are so inhumane, so disturbing, so evocative of everything that should not be, that they could rival the Death Angels, or even surpass them in some ways, as to their horrible visages, as to their alien way of thinking. Pray that you do not find them as you float around the multiplicity of realities within Limbo. This track is so amazing, one of my favorite tracks. That threatening horn and those subtle sounds that makes you think of some wild Limbo beast reminds you that Limbo can be just as deadly, if not more so, than the other realms of the Tree of Life. So what do I think of the KULT Divinity Lost official soundtrack? It's an amazing soundtrack. Each and every artist here put a bit of their soul into each one of these tracks. Even if they do not actually play KULT Divinity Lost, it is obvious that these musicians, that these poets have grasped the concept of KULT completely. They have become familiar with all of the different dimensions, with all of the philosophical problems, the dilemmas that are explored in this wonderful role-playing game. You could think of these artists as wanderers in their own right, maybe through their inspiration. In their meditations, they have traveled beyond the bounds and they are offering us these sounds from beyond. So, poetic as that may sound, in a more practical sense, this music can be used in any horror role-playing game, not just KULT. I can definitely see this being used in old World of Darkness games, perhaps for Mage or Werewolf. Definitely fits Werewolf, Demon the Fallen. There are so many role-playing games in which you can use these tracks. I love them so much. They are magnificent. They are atmospheric, evocative. They almost pull the fiction right out of the pages of the core rulebook and present it like a sort of kaleidoscope of wonders and nightmares. All of the tracks are amazing. They left me at times almost speechless. They inspired so many images in my mind of the things that you could see in a session of KULT Divinity Lost, and I had a lot of trouble putting it into words. So I think that both game masters and players will find great inspiration in each one of these masterpieces. So I highly recommend that you get the KULT Divinity Lost official soundtrack. You need to get this one. It's also a great way to, perhaps if you want to read a scary book, or if you want to just remain calm and tranquil after a hard day at work, you can just play one of these tracks and explore the darkest corners of your mind, of your soul. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. I also want to thank all of those that have been sending gift certificates, Drive-Thru-RPG gift certificates, to support the channel. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information how to send a Drive-Thru-RPG gift certificate will be in the description of this video. Once again, thank you so much for watching this review. I hope you will get the chance to enjoy each one of these evocative dark tracks at their fullest. See you later.